Whoa.
Jenny, do you know if Grant's coming?
I didn't hear that he wasn't coming. That's a good point. So I was in a meeting, I'll hold it up, just double check that he didn't email.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Eric Knutson, the student coordinator for the course. Today we're lucky enough to have Viet Luong come and speak to us. He is a visiting scholar at CISAC, representing the U.S. Army, served all over the world in Haiti, Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq, New Orleans, and also Afghanistan. And today he's going to be talking to us about how his brigade's combat deployment, how his brigade and his leadership made combat deployment decisions in eastern Afghanistan between 2010 and 2011, and the ethical decisions that they made and the considerations that they made. And let's go for it. Thank you.
Okay, it's great to be here. Some of you may be guessing that CISAC is opting to pick the most handsome and powerful Asian American colonel in the country. Not exactly the case. I think perhaps they've chosen me to speak because of the similarities I have with the iconic actor John Wayne. Okay. First off, is rugged masculinity. John Wayne is all 6'5" of it. I'm 5'6". However, I tell my office mate all the time, Charlie Miller, and I think we have some Vietnamese Americans here, that 5'6" native-born Vietnamese is actually huge. So we share that commonality. In addition to that, we commanded the same unit, right? He was in that movie, The Longest Day, portrayed Colonel Vandervoort, the commander of 2nd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry, 82nd Airborne during D-Day. I actually commanded that unit in reality, much lesser paid, but I was in combat with that as a battalion commander. And then last but not least, really we both played football for the home of the Heisman Trophy, University of Southern California. All right, we had 7, we gave back 2, but with 5, that's still a lot more than most Division I programs. So I'm glad to be associated with that. And then he played in a non-skilled position. He played line in the 1920s. I actually I had over 1,000 yards of receiving as a wide receiver. Same time with Rodney Peete. A little bit of overlap with that's slip. Marcus Allen, but I rarely saw those guys because I was playing intramural and they were, actually playing. Regardless, if you play football before, 1,000 yards is a lot of yards, and I would venture to say that if I were 6'5", I think I'll give Kobe Fleener a run for his money here at Stanford. All right, so pretty bold. We are here to talk about ethical decisions in combat. Pretty serious topic, and I'm going to share with you some of my decisions as a commander from New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina to combat operations Iraq, as a battalion commander where I commanded about 800 troops, and then lately as a brigade commander coming out of Afghanistan in 2010 where I commanded a formation of roughly 6,700 troops in eastern Afghanistan. But before I do that, I want to make sure I lay this foundation for you, first by talking about my experience in Afghanistan. I want to talk a little bit about task organization. I want to talk about the conditions and environment that these leaders are subjected to, so you can have some kind of context when you look at the decisions and at least have a notion of the conditions under which these decisions are made. And then I'll talk to you about how the Army prepares itself for operations or complex operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, first off, let's talk about the environment. I was here in what's known as P2K. Okay, it is not forwarding. I'm going to try it for a few seconds, and I'm just going to keep going. Okay, a little slow, but this is my area of operations. It's called Paktika and Coast in eastern Afghanistan. Here you have the federally administered tribal region, specifically Waziristan in Pakistan. We share a common border along the Durand Line, 267 kilometers. This area of operations is about 30,000 square kilometers, 2,000 inhabitants, predominantly Pashtun. And then In addition to that, you have major population centers, major, comparatively to what's in Afghanistan, Gardesk, Khost, Orgun, and Sharana, fairly sparsely populated with the denser areas, of course, closer to the population centers. You're only talking about 250 to 500 people per square kilometer. And then in the sparser areas, 50 to 250 shaded here. And then even in the outlining areas, you have lesser of a population density. Agriculture is a big thing in Afghanistan. I'll talk a little bit about my overall strategy for that later on, but we've identified that in addition to the population center as key terrain areas, all the agriculture areas in my area of operations. And then 3 provinces, 39 districts, 3 provincial capitals. In addition to that, we also identify the bazaars as key terrain because that promotes economy and also livelihood for the folks there. We have military. I have 6,700. I have on top of that about 10,000 ANSAF, Afghan National Security Forces, all 3 components. We have the ANA, the Afghan National Army, the Afghan Police, both national and uniform, ANP, AUP, and then the Afghan Border Patrol. Okay, so there's 10,000 of those guys spread out in over 33 different locations. In addition to that, my guys are also spread out in 33 separate locations. All right. In addition to the complex environment and tribal dynamics and the tyranny of terrain and a huge battle space, we also have a very, very capable enemy. And the enemy that I was dealing with is none other than the Haqqani network. Okay, these guys here are in the FATA, principally the Haqqani network. Okay, but in addition to that, also other loosely knitted organizations to include Pakistani Taliban. You have some Al-Qaeda elements as well as Commander Nazir Group. The best way to describe these guys are they are kind of operating in a symbiotic type of mutual support. What do they do? About 3,000 to 5,000 seasonal fighters, highly trained, recruited, ideologized inside these madrasas, in the sanctuaries, and then seasonally, fighting season at the beginning, at the end of winter, to all the way, as weather allows, all the way late to the fall, early winter, where these guys come across. They're supported about 2,000 other additional fighters here in the area of operations itself. Those guys principally maintain contacts, facilitate, establish training areas, logistics base, and in addition to that, continue the harassment and intimidation of coalition forces and the local populace. Haqqani's overarching strategy, from my read, is he wants to be able to retain Paktia, Paktik, and Khost. Traditionally, prior to the war, this area was economically, geographically, and also ethnically closer tied to Miram Shah in the FATA than it is to the government in Kabul. Okay, so there's a lot of reason that he wants it, but principally to be able to control this area, to have the same support, and then financially was a huge thing for him to be able to control this prime piece of land here. How does he do it? Again, I talked about these guys that are getting trained here and seasonally coming across through multiple infiltration routes. They come through Afghanistan, set up several places under the support areas or training camps to be able to train, refit, recruit, and then conduct attacks all through Afghanistan, principally in my area, but all the way up to Kabul. Okay. Things that they do, okay, this is interdiction of lines of communication, attacking coalition, attacking contractors, attacking most, vulnerably the ANSAF, Afghan National Security Forces, and then they place a great deal of pressure and terror upon the local populace in places that are very sparse, where there's no coalition or Afghan forces or governance. These guys, there, in turn, will form a shadow government to be able to govern the people and also establish Sharia law. But the enemy was not the only thing that I was dealing with in Afghanistan. The enemy is one thing, but as far as identifying the challenges, the enemies of Afghanistan, the enemy is only one part of it down here, and these are the things they try to do, as stated before. But I was also dealing with weak Afghan leadership. Corruption is a major issue for us, both government officials and ANSAF leadership. Had money lords, weak capacity at the district and provincial level, where I was focused at. You didn't get a sense of clear and concise guidance on below the subnational level as how governance and development was going to be executed. So I mean, it's very, very confusing. Bad international community practice. We do things to ourselves, right? We enable the wrong guys because we thought he was good, and then it turns out to be the most corrupt official there is in Afghanistan. You know, we mismanage aid projects or money. You know, the Taliban uses that advantage to tax these projects, and in turn, we're actually paying the Taliban indirectly, you know, after they tax these projects that we invest millions of dollars in. So those are the things that as you see our plan in the next few slides, we will try to tackle in our plan. Now, one of the most important documents that come out of the planning process really is for my unit, is the commander's intent. Sir, what do you want us to do? This is how I convey my intentions to my subordinates. First off is identifying the purpose. I thought the people was very essential, pretty straightforward. I mean, we'll protect them and gain their trust. But in addition to that, capacity building, all right? We're going to work at local governance, and we're going to build up the ANT staff so they can do their own law enforcement and also independent, you know, counterinsurgency operations. Decisive point, the things that are important to the success of the plan. Neutralization of the insurgency. I put that first and foremost because you can't do anything else unless you come after the insurgency pretty hard. And it has to be a balanced plan. We have to gain support of the people, but we want to put the Afghan government leaders in charge, and we want to be able to connect them to the people, not you know, the U.S. coalition forces to the people. And then also try to establish some commerce by connecting not only physically these commerce centers I was talking about, but also psychologically, also governance-wise, so that way they do feel a sense of connection, not only to their government, but to themselves. Some of the key tasks down here, I'm just going to you know, accentuate a few. We do this for the civil leaders. We also execute combined action campaign, which is nothing more than, instead of just advise and assist, we actually live, fight, okay, sleep with these guys on the same combat operating basis, or a forward operating basis, or a combat outpost out in Afghanistan. I talked to you about neutralizing not just the insurgency, but all the negative influencers. Also, civilian casualties. Civilian casualties, when I was there, you know, we had some in Iraq too. Unfortunately, it's war, you know, and we try to be as judicious as we can in the application of force, but it still happens. In Iraq, it was an issue, but the people were not as sanguine as they were as in Afghanistan. You know, two things that really pisses the Afghans off are CISAC and civilian casualties and night raids. They don't like that culturally. It's sacrosanct to them, those two things. And then on the bottom there, I was on the border. You know, I had a tough time working with trying to establish some kind of relationship with the Pakistani forces, but that's a requirement in order to achieve complementary effects. Meaning, at the end, I want to be able to, you know, for them to do their operations on one side and for me to be supporting them on the other side of the border, or at least be able to achieve the same effects by going after the same groups of bad guys. And that's my plan for going in. Now, how does this get operationalized? To go even a step further, my staff and also my interagency partners, I had 30 plus partners from Department of State, USAID, and Department of Agriculture working within my task force. I had 3 provincial reconstruction teams, 2 agribusiness development teams. I have a human terrain team with social scientists that helps me solve significant social issues. So I mean, it's a huge task force, and that's not the point of this brief. But again, this conceptual plan, as you can see, it's pretty fairly integrated by all members and all players, and not just a military plan that we put together. So henceforth, it's not just military, okay? So these tasks gets transcribed into this. This is just an overarching design here. Identify the objectives. On top here, this is when my unit came in. We kind of took over for the other unit. So we, for campaign continuity, we took a lot of their plans and ideas, right? Especially the ones that worked well for us, and try to propagate it through our stay. But this is where we were scheduled to redeploy, but we want to be able to plan ahead of time and at least have a template and idea for the next unit for their first 3 months of operations. Okay, that's what I'm most proud of. It's not just for ourselves, but be able to set up the next unit up for success. We took these 4 lines of effort from our predecessors: governance, security, development, and information. These outlined in red, as I stated before. Since we are in an agricultural region, I thought breaking out agriculture as a separate line of effort was worth doing. in addition to that, we talked about all these negative influencers, right? We talked, insecurity. Yeah, we're killing bad guys, but how do we get rid of a corrupt governor or a Afghan brigade commander that's corrupt? So I kind of developed this thing here, and the reason I did that was because if you didn't break it out, you had no ownership. So I actually pinned a rose on a staff section to convene a work group to work agriculture with the agribusiness development team, and also to work these lines here. And these are generally the goals and tasks that we're trying to establish under each lines of effort. They're sort of arrayed by time and space. All right, not exact science, but I said this is conceptual. But this comes with a 200-page document that's classified, of course, that speaks to the how of execution of this. But I always, I've been a planner all my life, and I've always believed in the value of format and having a medium for you to do this. Okay, and I'll be more than happy to talk through what processes we use to do this. But I'm going to get on ethics here eventually. But this is how operational design really translates to a subordinate unit. I'm going to use the next few slides to show you live at the company level. 2 levels down, right? I'm at the brigade, battalion at the next level, 800 to 1,000 troops, and then company depends on the type of company, but from 90 to 130 troops. You have a captain that's in charge. He only has 5 to 7 years in the Army, fairly young. But a lot of these guys had 2 rotations at least in Iraq or in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they have a lot of operational experience. But what I'm trying to tell you is, things must go on, and even under resource constraint or even without resources, these company commanders are charged not only to do security, but they got to execute the other lines of effort. So I'm just going to use the next 3 slides to kind of set the stage for that. Okay, this is a troop from my CAV squadron, Apache troop. Again, this is the headquarters, commanded by a captain, broken down into these 3 platoons, commanded by lieutenants, basically fresh out of the academy or one of these great institutions, and they have about just under 90 U.S. troops and 150 Afghan National Army guys that was partnered with this organization. Now this is their area of operation. Okay, as I was telling you, pretty big area of operation, about 1,200 kilometers square. Down here, in the valleys, about 3,000 feet, 3 to 4,000 feet. But up here, I have soldiers working above 8,000 feet. Very, very remote, and it's very physically rigorous. So what are they responsible for? Okay, they're responsible first and foremost of the enemy. He's broken down in 3 areas. This is Cop Sparrow. This is mostly terrain oriented. This platoon's mission is to be able to interdict bad guys from coming through. But as you can see later on here in Sparrow and Del Monte, he actually does have a role in governance and development, because in those 2 districts, they do have a district governor. They do have some line ministers and so on. But here, mainly harassing attack. Here in these 2 areas, these guys are a little bit more sophisticated. These are mostly stay-behind guys that can form command and control node. They can do reporting. They can establish training camps and guard the logistical nodes for the transient fighters, the highly trained fighters that come across during seasonal fighting season. And then they can use multiple weapon systems, right? Not just only small arms, but rocket-propelled grenades. They can shoot mortars. They can shoot rockets at you. They can mass. This is 100 plus are the guys that are in those AORs, but they can mass up to 300 if they want to overrun a cop to send a message or to really achieve a strategic victory. Every time they run, they overrun an American combat outpost. And then varying degree of tactics, techniques, and procedures down here. They change them on occasionally, but everybody's fair game, including contractors who are there to try to build roads and just try to make it better for the people of Afghanistan. Now, I talked to you about lines of effort, right? At the brigade, resource to be able to do all this stuff. This little captain down here, he has nothing. All right. Now, if he was in a higher priority area, he may have 1 or 2 called district support teams. I may augment him with. Remember, I have 39 districts. I only have 30 or so civilians. So in those high priority districts, he may see a civil affairs non-commissioned officer, Army type, teamed up with a USAID person, or a single Department of State field officer trying to do not just governance but everything. Okay. Just to augment that, but they do have reach back capability to the battalion, to the brigade, and so on. But Here, as I told you before, is terrain oriented, so he has a little bit of agriculture to do to try to build a relationship with the local people there, but he doesn't have a government infrastructure to lash into. In Spera and Dalmanda, they do have a sub-governor. So, I mean, some of the things, you know, we're taking one small step at a time in these areas. Remember, some of these areas are completely Taliban dominated. So, you know, just to get the sub-governor from a district to go to a shura, which is a huge meeting, town meeting that they go through to connect the government to the populace is a major adventure in some of those areas. The Tashkils are basically organization chart, or in the Army we call it the task organization. Basically, each district is allowed one district governor and about eight line ministers, and the ministries, the major ones being, you know, defense, interior, agriculture, finance, and so on and so forth. So you get the picture. So here in these two areas, he's trying to do, you know, work with the sub-governor at the same time. You know, development, project nomination forms, basically to get these guys from the people. It's a great process. You know, from the villagers, they get to put in these project nomination forms of the things that they need. Sometimes it's a school, sometimes it's as small as a well, for them to actually use their government. You know, this the face of government to get it approved. So I think it's a wonderful thing. And then down here, agricultural extension agent, like I told you before. We don't have a lot of capacity down at the company level, but one of the great ideas that one of my ag guy came up with was, hey, we hire some of these guys that are graduates of the Agricultural University in Coast, and you know, totally invisible to the people, but we kind of hired him as, you know, part of the government. He works for the ag guy at the district level, but he goes around and teaches people class on animal husbandry. Teach them how to grow crops and so on and so on. Not the ideal solution, but as a workaround, maybe, you know, with the hope that in the long run, we can actually have a ag guy that's actually paid by the Afghan government instead of a guy that we're using in proxy, okay? But I mean, I'm proud of those innovations though, because if it weren't for those innovations from you know, the leaders and soldiers and civilians that we have, a lot of these things would not happen at all, you know? And it shows good civ-mil integration. Okay, so it looks good on paper, right? I'm going to show you a quick video clip on, this is an actual company of mine in one of the worst areas in Afghanistan, but just to give you some context into, before I start talking about ethical decisions and what kind of pressure these guys are on. And then there's some examples of decisions that I want to get from this video as well. Okay? And I apologize for YouTube because that's all I have access to. You know, once you leave a unit as a commander, you don't have access to the things you used to.
Okay. What you see is brutal. The intensity
This is the best I can do.
anything
Things not working.
9 years of covering this war. U.S. soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division are locked in a never-ending the border as an open door. The soldiers say that as fast as they can kill them, they just keep coming.
Hope you can hear a
Across
little
the
bit.
border from
We stay
safe
quiet.
havens in Pakistan, trying to kill as many Americans as they can. 60 Minutes was given extraordinary access to the men of the 101st who are on the front line of the border fight, operating from around 50 combat outposts, forward operating bases, along a 450-mile stretch, the most dangerous frontier in the world. Our trip began at Combat Outpost Zurab, just 12 miles from the Pakistani border.
The story will continue in a moment.
This one came in yesterday. It's a 107 rocket.
3 minutes after Captain John Hintz started explaining how to stay alive on his base.
Then things are going great. That's incoming.
The first rocket hit.
Camera crews, camera crews. Hey, let's go, right here, right here.
It was the first hour of our first day at Combat Outpost Zurab.
Here we go. Let's go.
Already we were getting a taste of what Captain Hintz and his men lived through every day. And they'd been doing this for 7 months. Within 10 minutes, the barrage was over. It had wounded 2 of Hintz's men. Specialist Peter Kuiper's shirt was soaked with blood from wounds to his head. They're all used to dealing with injuries here. 40 out of Hintz's 88 soldiers have been awarded Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat.
All right, well, let's walk up this way a little bit.
The 40-year-old commander from Iowa has received 3 Purple Hearts himself. This is a tough fight, and you're in one of the worst places. I mean, even for somebody like you with a rough tour in Iraq under your belt, surviving 8 roadside bombs.
I don't even think that's uncommon, though. I mean, I've got to be honest. My whole company's that. I've got a kid out there that's got 8 Purple Hearts. He just got shot in the head during a battle. Kid
And he
fought.
survived?
He survived, and he fought for 3 more hours. I mean, it's just the way these guys are.
Captain Hintz commands one of the most dangerous pieces of ground in Afghanistan. It may look like a desolate patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere, but this tiny base sits right on one of the main routes used by the enemy to ferry fighters and weapons from Pakistan.
You can never rest out here because you know that they want this spot back. And the foreign fighters are very well trained. They carry better weapon systems. They have much more ammunition. So when you get into a fight with them, you know you're in a fight.
When you say foreign fighters, from where?
Pakistan. We're only about 12 to 13 miles away from Pakistan, and we know we kill a lot of people here. And these guys, it doesn't matter if you kill 30 that day, or it doesn't seem to matter, because they'll be back the next day or the next week.
With more fighters?
Yes,
Are the men you're facing committed?
they're more committed than anything I've ever seen. One day we killed 31 of them. We could see them dying on the hills. And we were engaging them, and we were killing them. And they kept charging us.
We obtained video of their enemy from the other side of the border. It's the foreign fighters, like Arabs and Pakistanis, that Hintz says are the most skilled. They lead the local Afghans in battle. But both fight in the name of the Taliban. How much area around here does the Taliban control?
Wow, that's, I have probably 300 square kilometers, and the vast majority is controlled by the Taliban. We push hard, we patrol heavy, we go out there, but I would say probably 18 to 20 square kilometers is what I think I own.
Out of 300.
Yes.
Are there areas here that you can't even go into at all? Taliban areas?
Yes, there's multiple areas in this sector that I can't go into.
I mean, that's incredible. I think people listening to that will just be wondering, how can we be 9 years into this war? And when you're sitting here surrounded by Taliban villages that in some cases you can't even go into.
I think the challenge is in finding out, how to separate the Taliban from the village.
That's the challenge Hintz and his men faced on this mission, to a village that's asked for help rebuilding their canal. It's the core of the U.S. strategy, to build relationships with the villages so they don't support the Taliban. Even though it means driving to an area that's a known staging ground for the Taliban and foreign fighters coming in from Pakistan, and they get attacked every time they go there, they set out to pay the village a visit.
Well, as long as we don't get stuck today, we're going to be good.
A 3-mile trip that took an hour and a half because of the impossible terrain.
Man, this terrain sucks. You're just hanging up on a big rock, I think on the left.
The speed we're moving at and the difficulty, it just feels like this is one big target.
We are one big target here. We're driving right to the Taliban villages. They're watching us. Guaranteed they got a spotter sitting right up on this mountain. And he's reporting everything back to his chain of command, and they're just waiting for us.
When they arrived at the village, the reception was cool.
Yeah, there's 2 of them.
And we noticed Captain Hintz was instantly on edge.
You don't get a friendly feel here, do you?
Not really, no.
I don't think so either.
The villagers kept their distance, unlike previous visits when they welcomed him.
See them sitting watching.
Different dynamic.
Captain Hintz tracked down the elder who had invited him here to find out what was going on.
Last time we came here, a lot of people came up and talked to us. Is there something going on today? Is it a time of prayer, or is it...
Not even he wanted to talk. It seemed he couldn't wait to get away.
Crap. appreciate you talking. Thank you, Chairman.
Hintz was disappointed. By now, it felt like a setup. The captain and his men were uneasy.
We'll see how easily we get out of here. Tell you guys to be watching, okay? They're gonna be watching these mountains. They can't just walk along, okay?
This is what American soldiers are dealing with every day in villages across Afghanistan as they try to carry out their mission.
Right now, if the Taliban is influencing that village or living in that village and we're not, then that's the choice you have, you know, to go with the Taliban and live or to talk to us and support us, and then as soon as we leave, you'll be dead.
The trip back was long and tense. One of the trucks got stuck.
Ooh, they're up on 3 wheels. Straighten the wheels.
Hintz and his men struggled to free the vehicle, which weighed nearly 13 tons.
What's up, man? A hammer or something?
Every second they were on the ground, they were exposed.
Stop!
It was the moment the enemy seemed to be waiting for.
Get in!
Bullets cracked and whistled over our heads.
They're running all around us. They had a lot of AK-47s. They fired RPGs at us. Once you start hearing the snaps of the rounds, that means they're right on you. Shoot! There you go! Shoot! There you go!
Our cameraman, Ray Ribieska, stayed close to the soldiers to capture the fight.
Hey, fire mission on twins!
Hintz ordered in mortars. Here you can see Captain Hintz on the hood of our truck, completely exposed to enemy fire. He's trying to secure the 200-pound tow bar so the convoy can get moving.
Get in the truck! Get in the truck!
The convoy still had to fight its way through the ambush.
What's left? What's left? Hey, push it! I need you to relax more!
After 30 minutes of constant fighting, it was over. Hintz believes they killed 15 enemy fighters.
Yeah, even for me, sometimes it's hard to watch because, you know, the things that you ask soldiers to do on a daily basis and their willingness to do it. You know, I mean, as you look at that, just that one simple example, that's happening throughout Afghanistan, and you know, that guy had to make a lot of decisions. That come to connect, you know, that really has to do with how he treats the population and what kind of risks that he's willing to expose his soldiers to, because he's responsible for their lives. You know, he could do nothing. Since, I mean, he told you clearly that he was going to a Taliban village, and but you know, those people needed help. They were caught in between a very, very complex scenario, and he was willing to do that. And there's many things that he considered, you know, risk to his troops, but you know, but principally getting the mission done, to be able to do that. You know, he could isolate that village. He could never, you know, not come back to it. He can conduct more, put more pressure on the village by conducting more raids. You know, you have some surveillance and intelligence. You can certainly catch a lot of bad guys probably operating right out of that village, but he chose not to. And I think what you're not seeing here is, I don't know if, in that area, I don't know if we, at the end, you know, we have won, but in his specific area, and I'll talk about later on about what I try to convey to the troops as I go on and talk to them about their mission, but he was able to transform the environment. Just doing missions like this, you know, we were surging more bigger operations all in around him to try to get at the insurgency. But by the end, you know, at first we're trying to run these these big meetings with the provincial governor, district governors coming down. Nobody would come because they were in fear of their lives. But towards the end there, and I think Colonel Joe Felter can attest to it, a lot of our special forces guys, friends, you know, had initiated a couple of projects and a few shures, and we had thousands of people show up. So, you know, there's hope. You know, I mean, you can transform the environment and change people's minds, but it's going to take time. I'm gonna spend the next slide just talking real briefly about my own ethical decisions I have to make, you know, under duress, and it goes back all the way to 2005 when I first took command of the 2nd Battalion 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. We were the 82nd DRF-1, which is Division Ready Force 1. The unit that's on a strain to, upon a call from the National Command Authority to deploy anywhere in the world to do whatever our mission asks us to do, to combat operations ranging from combat operations to rescuing conducting non-combatant evacuations of American citizens abroad threatened by whatever. But we were ready to do that, and I get this call on the 20th of September. It's like, okay, we were prepared. We were highly trained. We thought we were going to Afghanistan. We get the call to say, hey, you're going to Hurricane Katrina, and that was probably one of the hardest things that I have to do. We were wheels up in 4 hours from notification from the time we got the call. We were in Hurricane Katrina about 2 hours after that. Huge mess. In addition to the despair and the destruction, you had a lot of criminal elements that were capitalizing on anarchy to really put pressure, retribution against the law enforcement, and also conduct all sorts of atrocities on the local populace there. Going in there, we were fully armed, we were fully equipped like we were in combat. But the decision at that time, for me was hey, the threat is not as bad as I thought it was being portrayed. In addition to that, based on our professionalism, and all these criminals know who they were dealing with. You take a hardened paratroop battalion and put them in the middle of New Orleans. I don't think they're going to mess with us. So I kind of counted on that. And then thirdly, it's about the mission. Okay, I tell my guys, we are in our own country. All right, we don't need to act like we're in Iraq. We don't need to wear body armor and put on the Kevlar helmet and point weapons at people. That's not what we do. Okay, so instead of this principal security mission, we turn it into a rescue mission. We rescue a bunch of people. But with that decision, in hindsight, it worked out well for us. We rescued thousands of people. We were able to accomplish our mission and retain the esprit and pride of our unit to be able to help our fellow Americans. But it could have turned very, very badly. A few of my guys could have been shot by gangsters, and the next thing you know, it's like, okay, you're a failure because you were putting your soldiers at risk. But at that time, I was going through all the different things, and I thought the right thing to do was, okay, we're going to take a little bit of risk, okay, but we're going to get the mission done. Contrary to that, when I got to Iraq, in 2006, the same battalion now, after we came back from Hurricane Katrina, we were called out to conduct combat operations in Iraq. 2006, Samara. They just blew up the Golden Mosque in February. That started all the sectarian violence all throughout Iraq. Right, it's a pretty bad area. And I got there in July, and it was game on. It was the most dangerous area in Iraq. And then towards the end of 2006, as they were ready to surge forces, at the beginning of 2007 to Baghdad, all the bad guys were going up to Samara and everywhere else just to get away. And I wasn't getting more support, because the main effort was within Samara. So our force posture was a very, very strong posture. We would force vehicles off the road. We had a curfew. We actually we were strangling Samara. We closed a lot of streets. We put in a lot of roadblocks. We put a berm around it, and some of this stuff was existed prior to my time. But I kind of adopted that concept. And after about 2 to 3 months, I was kind of had a reflection and thought about saying, hey guys, what are we doing? We're not winning over the populace. We're not showing that we are a better choice than Al Qaeda. We are putting a lot of pressure on the population, and we were making them suffer. So I decided to lift the curfew, open up some of the streets, and then after that, things starting to blossom. But with that decision, I actually put my guys more at risk because unbeknownst to me, that there was a reason to all that stuff, which I didn't see, and the bad guys started having freedom of movement. I started to take a bunch of casualties, and after a while, I'm like, hey, I made a huge mistake. I'm putting my soldiers more at risk, and I'm not doing any better. People still hate me. There's no government in Samara, and nobody wants to volunteer for it because it's dangerous, And so I went back to Block 1, reinstituting the curfew, putting in all the roadblocks, and then with that we increased the targeting of Al Qaeda, and we're like, hey, we got to go return this thing, and that strategy remarkably work towards the end because we were ready to, we were able to capture and kill so many Al Qaeda that the former regime elements, which are the guys that are associated with them, but they're Iraqis, you know, started to come to our side like, hey, okay, we got it. We didn't sign up for this very strict Sharia law that AQI was trying to establish, you know. So we'll come over your side. Yet that's another ethical decision. It was hard. It was hard because I know these guys have American blood in their hand, but you know what? To get the mission done, those are some of the things that we had to do in order to win the big war. You know, and believe it or not, you know, less than a year later, they were rebuilding the Golden Mosque. They had, you know, city government there. You know, I sacrificed a lot. You know, a lot of my soldiers didn't make it home, and you know, I always think about that. But I would like to think that our sacrifice was not really all in vain. You know, but it takes a decision and then a reversal of decision to be able to get the job done. But sometimes, you know, the point I'm trying to get to is there's no right. You know, I mean, I'll show you some slides of the training that we undergo, but a lot of it is on your leadership, on your moral upbringing, and most, first and foremost, great commanders have great intuition. It seems to make the right decision based on all the different data points they have. But I will tell you that if you're going to rely on some book or some briefing that somebody gives you, you're not going to be successful. Mission risk versus investment versus cost. I'll give you a couple examples. Again, in Samar, Iraq, you know, I always look at how much risk my soldiers are taking to get the mission done. And one of the company commanders came in one day. You know, after this heavy targeting period, we were very successful, and guys were getting more confident. So they starting to get overconfident, I think. And one of my commanders wanted to do this huge mission that involves you know, multiple moving pieces, ground movement over a large stretch of dirt roads, some helicopter assaults on top of that, and back then the enemy had developed these things called homemade explosive HME phosphate-based materials that they were using. Very, very large. They were able to kill complete vehicles. The Humvees were not very survivable against that. And if you go on a dirt road, if you hit one of those, you're going to kill 5 soldiers right off the bat. And at that time, I told the guy, you know, I did some assessment. I said, okay, investment versus cost. You're doing all this stuff, highly complicated. You go into you go on for a target that I don't think is really worth it. And then in addition to that, I think he will move eventually. And if we continue to track him, we'll wait for him to go to another location that allows us to be able to have more success against this target. Well, 2 weeks later, the same company commander and I come back from an air assault raid, helicopter raid at night. We come back in. One of my friends from Special Operations guys called me and says, hey, we got the #1 guy from the #1 Al-Qaeda guy, I think, queued up and with certainty that he's here. Not even in my sector, pretty close. And he goes, I need your support, because, you know, he didn't have the forces because of the size of that target. And he goes, can you give me some units? And I said, yeah, I'll give you a company. And he goes, no, I'm going to need 3 companies, which is almost my entire battalion. And I looked at the target set, and then I looked at the fact that this guy was the #1 guy, you know, Al-Masri. He just got killed last year, finally, but he was the #1 guy. And just not only a victory for us, but I mean, how many lives that would save, and that's a huge strategic victory over Al-Qaeda to kill their #1 guy in Iraq. Because those guys were propagating more violence and ideology than the typical Iraqi. So we were going to go after this guy. I roused up my guys in the middle of the night, and then with no rehearsals, just some orders and some planning, some briefbacks. In 3 hours, we executed the target. Now, you know, afterwards, I had to go back to the company commander and kind of talk them through that piece. Hey, look. Because, you know, I know what they're thinking. Like, sir, just last week you wouldn't let us do this mission, but here you are calling us up in the middle of the night. But I had a lot of trust in our combat experience and ability to execute. And then sometimes you got to take a little risk. But I was very confident that we could execute that mission. Now, on the other hand, if that thing had gone wrong and we had killed a bunch of civilians and then we had gotten a bunch of soldiers killed, I probably wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. Okay, but I mean, you know, at this level, we get paid to make those decisions. That involves life and death, and we use the best way to do that. I can talk about the next 2, but I think I'm going to run out of time here soon. But basically, the next 2 are, you know, you got to give these assessments when you're dealing with your partners, and I called it as I saw it, and I actually degraded their. You know, I got to give my Afghan and Iraqi partners this assessment every month to show their bosses where they are, and I was the only one that would consistently give them low marks, and it really caused them to lose face in you know, among their chain of command and also their U.S. counterparts. But you know, to me, I thought it was more important, you know, at the risk of, you know, hurting my relationship with my counterparts, to really report, you know, with integrity, and really, if these guys are not ready for independent combat operations, or they have weak leadership, I'm going to call it as I see fit. And I would just tell you that sometimes you make those assessments, but sometimes it may not be the most popular decision. It may impact, you know, or may have second and third order effects that's going to impact your overarching operation. And then corruption, the same way. In Afghanistan, we try to confront first. I mean, it depends on the level of corruption. You know, some guys, it's really preying on the people and preying on their own troops. You know, we would target those guys pretty hard. But, you know, how much, I mean, in the States, we, you know, I mean, most of us do not, you know, tolerate any kind of corruption, really, you know, personally. But there, you have to make a decision. Okay, how corrupt is too corrupt? And you have to make those assessments, you know. And we do for each individual leaders. I mean, but again, the central approach is guys that we think we can change. We try to target their behavior and confront them one-on-one on their behaviors, and hopefully get that turn around. But for guys who are irreconcilable, we try to put a packet on them, just like almost with the fidelity of an intelligence packet, to say, okay, these are all the bad things that this guy's doing, and turn it into the government of Afghanistan to try to get these guys removed. How do we train for this? Okay, this is sort of a complex slide, so I'm not going to really talk about it. I just want to focus on, don't focus too much down here. If you're taking this course for credit, this is going to be part of the exam down here, all this stuff. Okay, but look, I had about a year to prepare my unit for Afghanistan, January 09 to about January 10, and this is when we deployed. But in between there, I want to talk about, as far as ethics concerned, individual and institutional ethics training occurs here under individual training, first 150 days or so, and then towards the middle here, we bring all this in, everything we learned, into a more realistic scenario under realistic combat conditions as a brigade before we go to this major training event. This is a mission rehearsal exercise, which is really your validation for your unit before you go to combat. So I want to talk about this a little bit over the next couple of slides. So here's individual training samples, pretty basic. This is not all inclusive, but Army has yearly and quarterly training requirements that we conduct, such as prevention of sexual harassment, consideration of others, and then a law of war is pretty inherent in everything we do. In addition to that, we conduct leader training, a little bit more sophisticated, a little more collegial. We talk about the moral development model. We talk about how we operate, the battle space we operate in, and the decisions that we have to make. Under institution, though, one of the things that I'm most proud of being an Army officer is that we are very introspective, and we're pretty hard on ourselves. You know, we look at things we do, and we conduct an after-action report in every training event, just to look at things that we can do better. And in the institutional environment, they actually take real-world vignettes and have discussions on it. This one here is the group of soldiers that murder and rape the 14-year-old girl in Mahmoudiya and her entire family. This one here is a battalion commander who chose to do his own interrogation, violating all kinds of principles and procedures. And then this one here is a captain who decides to move some injured Iraqis through during the sectarian violence there in Baghdad, just to try to keep them alive. So in all those examples, the beauty of that is not only they talk about the case itself, but they also make the students fully analyze by putting themselves in the same scenario and what actions they would take under the same situation, as well as looking at if available, the detailed official investigation report. We call it 15-6. All right, if that's available, they would even look at that and would be asked, okay, if you were the investigating officer, do you agree with all the following findings? So it's pretty brutal, but it's good. But from there, from the individual leader training, we go to this collective training. This is a sample. I brought my entire brigade. In garrison, we only had 3,500. There were augmentees in combat at minute 67, but took them to the field under a realistic environment. First and foremost is operating under the Afghan common operating environment, and then the theater rules. you know, the rules that for operations that General McChrystal put out at the time. Karzai has his 12 rules, you know, before combat operations, some of them being a night raids, you know, you had Afghan forces with you, you know, the collateral damage that it may imply. And then at certain level, depends on how many of those things you violate, you know, you have to be able to push it to the next level. As a brigade commander, I cannot violate any of the Karzais 12. Okay, but that would tell you how hard it is. And then the you know, the rules of engagement. We also inject scenarios that soldiers see in combat, civilian casualties, contact in urban areas to see their actions. There's a violation of law of war, and then also dealing with corrupt officials. So what does that all say? What does that all mean? When I talk about inculcation of an ethical climate, you know, training certainly is an aspect. I just talked to you about training, but I don't think training alone does enough for providing that ethical climate. If I had to narrow it down to something, I would say leadership. And you may say that's simple, but that's actually, you know, sort of profound. It's not just because there's a lot of things you do under leadership. First of all, I was fortunate enough to be given command of a very prestigious unit. You know, it's those guys already, they're on the ball. They have a very, very long, storied tradition. Very proud of what they were able to do. Very aggressive, by the way. But some of the things that I have to do is, first of all, say, okay, got it, you know, but I got to kind of temper down the aggressiveness a little bit and kind of build in, hey, you guys are good, but we have to have a little bit of humility. We have to have some compassion. And you try to build that, not only through your training program, but what you do as a leader. Me as a leader, I can't, it's you know, when it comes to integrity, when it's come to doing the right thing, you know, I mean, I don't even take, you know, I'm the ranking guy in my brigade, and I don't, you know, I don't go and take my subordinates parking space, because that, to me, that's doing the wrong thing. So something as simple as that, to set the moral tone for your unit is very important. Okay, so that's leadership. The second important aspect of leadership is leader presence. If you are not there to supervise, to encourage, to inspire, to mentor, then you're not doing your job. Simply put it, you know, it only takes you know, one or two bad guys out of thousands of guys to conduct those atrocities. I truly believe it only takes a couple of guys to do that. But it only takes one leader to stop it every time. If all those cases, I can tell you, if there's a good leader in that spot, you know, if you had like a Felter or Charlie Miller, that would never happen. I firmly believe in that. So how do I further inculcate this in combat? It's very difficult. Soldiers get frustrated. You know, guys like Captain Hinch and those guys fighting for a year in that little outpost, living like in a pretty rough, you know, primeval conditions up there. How do you tell those guys that they're making a difference? But actually, they were making a difference. So every time I go out to do my combat, my leaders' battlefield circulation, I would try to give them a better picture of what's going on out of the brigade sector and how those operations that they have conducted contributed to the overall success of the brigade. And then we were very successful to a great extent. So I had to tell these guys how they're incorporating that. The second thing is you have to have strong beliefs. I don't care what your background is, but you have to believe in the mission. You have to believe in the mission to be successful. And me, I truly, personally believe that is good versus evil. You know, I mean, we were there trying to do a lot of good, and my guys were out there like, sir, we go out there and you can see they're going out there risking their lives because these villagers wanted some help. And I firmly believe in that. So when I go around talking to troops, I try to reinforce those points. You know, I'm Vietnamese American, came over one of the last birds to leave Vietnam. When it comes to patriotism, this may sound corny to you, I don't take a back seat to anything. So regardless of, you know, I mean, these guys, they have varying political views and all that stuff, but I'm like, hey, we're doing this for our nation, guys. You guys signed up to do this. I do too, all right? It's tough, all right? It sucks, but we signed up to do it, okay? So I try to inculcate that. Final thoughts. I know I'm running way out of time, but we're going to try to hit some, at least a couple of questions, but you know, it would be a remiss for me to not talk about my soldiers. I get choked up every time I talk about soldiers, but there are a lot of great Americans out there, guys. I mean, you may not know them, but they may be among here. They may be some of your relatives, but you know, these guys are out there doing our nation's work, and you know, they don't ask to go to Afghanistan. Nobody asks. I don't want to go to Afghanistan, you know. But we're charged with doing what our nation asks us to do, and you know, I can talk to you guys. You know, Specialist Robinson, he won one of our nation's highest medals in Afghanistan. 20 years old, he was guarding an outpost in the middle of the night, and he was with some Afghans, and they were being attacked by a couple of hundred Taliban, and the Afghans starting to, you know, fade away, and this little 19-year-old fought off about 30 Taliban guys, and when he ran out of ammo, he grabbed some Afghan weapons and started shooting that. And then when he saw that one of the suicide bombers was going to get through the gate, he ran out there and engaged the guy and neutralized the target, and then ran up to the tower and provided first aid to Foster. That's been, you know, he'd been knocked out because the enemy tried to run a vehicle bomb through the gate there. But you know, you talk about those guys. I mean, I just get choked up every time. You know, Bugadas was severely wounded. I get a call in my headquarters, hey, sir, you need to come down here. Bugadas wants to see you. And so I always go down there anyway, but I got this special request from Bugadas, and I ran down there, and you know, he's been wounded 3 times, and he just came out of surgery, and he was barely awake, and he said, sir, I want you to re-enlist me for 6 years to stay in the Army, because I want to be able to continue to do what I'm doing. You know, I've talked to you about Lopez. Lopez was involved in a fierce firefight, and he had lost some of his counterparts, and I went and saw him in the hospital, and he couldn't see out his eyes. You know, he was pretty badly wounded, and he was fighting for his life, but he kept on asking me about Brown. He goes, sir, how's Brown doing? That's his best friend, and I never really had the courage to tell him that Brown was dead. But before Lopez passed out, he told me, he said, sir, I did the best I could. But with that, all right, I know there's no lunch involved with this session, but I'm gonna try to open up for some questions.